Alright, here we are. Here we are in the stream. Just want to make sure my sound seems to be okay. Alright, welcome to the Complete Commander. Like many of you, I've been setting up to do some playing of Commander over webcam, so I've kind of rigged up my camera in a way that looks down at a playmat so I can play some Paper Commander, which I did my first game yesterday and had a great time. So anyway, I've had some people asking me about my GROTHAMA deck, and which I did play yesterday on webcam, so that was kind of fun. But I thought, since I had my webcam set up for Paper Magic, that I thought I would go ahead and play a little, or not play, but just kind of go over my GROTHAMA deck. And hello Chris, welcome to the stream. Anyway, so GROTHAMA is a pretty sweet commander from Battle Bond, and it's for 5 mana. It's a 10/8 worm, so it's pretty huge. And the cool thing about him is he gives each attacking creature the ability to fight with him as a trigger. So any creature on the battlefield gets to fight GROTHAMA, and if GROTHAMA leaves the battlefield, any damage that was dealt to him, the controller of that, of whatever dealt damage to him, gets to draw that many cards. So the idea is, if you had enough creatures that could deal 8 points of damage to GROTHAMA, then GROTHAMA would die, and then you'd get to draw that many cards. So anyway, I just kind of wanted to go over some cool stuff about the deck. I've got the deck kind of laid out in piles, but I've got 4 cards here that are sort of the highlights of the deck. First one I have on here is Stuffy Doll, and Stuffy Doll is kind of cool because it's an 0/1 indestructible creature, and whenever damage is dealt to it, you get to have whatever damage is dealt to it be dealt directly to a player that you've named when you cast Stuffy Doll. So what's fun about Stuffy Doll in this deck is if you attack with Stuffy Doll and GROTHAMA's out, you can fight with GROTHAMA. GROTHAMA deals 10 damage to it, and then 10 damage directly to a player. So that's something fun. Another cool card is Mossbridge Troll. And this creature, he's a 5/5, and whenever he would be destroyed, you just automatically regenerate, which is kind of cool. And then you can tap up to 10 power worth of creatures or more to give him +20/+20 until the end of the turn. And lucky for us, all we would need to do is tap GROTHAMA, which is 10 power. So the really nice trick here is if you've got a Mossbridge Troll out and you cast GROTHAMA, tap it to give your Troll +20/+20, and then attack with Mossbridge, and in the middle of the attack you get the trigger, so you fight GROTHAMA with the Mossbridge Troll, and then you kill GROTHAMA and you draw 25 cards. So that's something fun to do. I pulled that particular combo off in my web game yesterday, and that was a lot of fun. But of course then I died after that, but Anyway, so that's what's fun about Moss Bridge Troll. So then there's also Vigor. Vigor tends to lead to some pretty big blowouts. Basically, any other creature that you have on the battlefield, if you attack with it and then fight Grothama, you get a bunch of triggers with Vigor, so that Grothama deals 10 damage to that creature, and then that creature deals however much damage to Grothama, and then they each get, instead of taking that damage, they get +1/+1 counters instead. So basically Grothama adds 10 counters to all your creatures, and then your creatures add a bunch of counters to Grothama, and it gets huge and out of hand pretty quickly. So SJS Mac in the chat says better have Reliquary Tower. I actually don't have Reliquary Tower in this deck. I had a bunch of non-basic lands, but I kept running into having too many of them, and it ended up that it ended up getting cut. So not entirely sure that's the best move, but I'm sort of the philosophy that it's fine to discard and just keep 7 amazing cards, but I could be wrong. So we'll get to my non-basics later, and maybe we could talk about that. So anyway, last up is Psychosis Crawler, which deals damage to each opponent every time you draw a card. So anyway, you can kind of see where we're going there. If we end up drawing a bunch of cards with Grothama, we can deal a lot of damage to a bunch of people. And that particular play, I actually had, I think I had tapped Grothama to make Moss Bridge Troll +20/+20, and then sacrificed it to Greater Good with Psychosis Crawler out, and ended up dealing 25 damage to everybody, which officially got the Sheldon Menery, that was a Dookie play response from Mr. Menery. So that was fun. St. Hokey says sound fixed, I'm in. Okay. Was the sound out earlier? Or were you just saying maybe in my earlier streams my sound was screwy? Okay. So anyway, those are sort of the, I would say, the top 4 cards for the deck, and we'll go ahead and set that aside for now. Another cool thing with Grothama is a lot of cards that care about having something large on the battlefield. So I've got Selvala, Heart of the Wilds, Ronus, the Indomitable, Serac, the Hunt Caller, Goreclaw, Terra of Calcisma, Pathbreaker, Ibex, the Great Hinge, and then of course Galta, Primal Hunger. So anyway, these are just good cards on their own, but obviously with Grothama out there, a lot of these get a lot better. And anyway, they tend to do some good stuff, and if something happens to Grothama, it's fine to just kind of beat down with some of these bigger creatures. Of course, Selvala is not a big creature, but it can give you a lot of mana if you have big creatures out. So anyway, yeah, love for Galta. Gotta love Galta. I even got the cool promo foil version. Another important part of this deck is I've got a lot of ways to play extra lands. So, for instance, I've got Gaia's Touch, I've got Oracle of Moldiah, and I've got Exploration, Azusa, and Wayward Swordtooth. And what I really like about these is that when you're drawing all those extra cards, it's nice to be able to kind of refuel land drops, because a lot of these cards can be kind of explosive, but then once you've played out your lands, the usefulness of them kind of goes away. But in this particular deck, as you can guess, a lot of times I'm drawing a huge influx of cards later in the game, so then these cards still remain pretty useful, because you can, often drop 2 or 3, maybe even 4 lands out of your hand. And another thing that's nice about that is because of Grothama, a lot of times will be dying and going to the command zone. Drawing more cards and playing a bunch of extra lands makes it pretty easy to keep casting him from the command zone. Alright, so Chris mentions Grothama was on the most recent Command Zone podcast about most fun commanders to see across the table from you. I like it. I like it. Hopefully my opponents agree when they're playing against my Grothama deck. So anyway, those are cards that help me play more lands and be able to keep playing Grothama out of the command zone. And so I also included some cards that care about lands, like Tireless Tracker. I've got Crash of Rhino Beetles. I've got Multani. And so those are all cards that appreciate the extra land drops. And I've also got Courser of Crufix, so you can play some extra lands off the top of the deck. I've also got Cavalier of Thorns, and I've also I've found room for Nylea's Intervention. My hope is, I haven't actually gotten a chance to play this card yet, but my thought is it's a way to convert some of the extra mana that you may have from playing all the extra lands to go get some more lands, and then obviously play them out again pretty quickly. So, and then I've also got a Emerald Medallion, and then I play 41 mana producing lands, and I've also got an extra land mana, Maze of Ith, so that I can always be dropping lands and taking advantage of exploration and things like that. So SJS Mac says, this is such a different strategy, letting your commander die is counterintuitive. Yeah, it kind of is, but I think we can all get behind the idea of drawing lots of cards, right? So, and sometimes Grothama is just a huge beater, right? It's 10 points of damage. If you can give it trample and swing in, it can usually kill in like 2 swings. So I actually got, speaking of trample, I've got Shadow Spear, I've got Rancor, and I've got Loxodon Warhammer. So these 2 will give you life. Rancor's pretty nice because it'll come back to your hand after Grothama dies. And yeah, Chris says 41 lands. Wow. Yep. I can always use all the extra lands I can get in this deck. So also, in addition to these enhancements, I've also got a Swiftfoot Boots, because, that's what you do. And I've also got Concordant Crossroads, and Concordant Crossroads is kind of dangerous sometimes, but occasionally I can get an infusion of cards that I draw, and then I want to be able to dump a couple of huge creatures and be able to attack all at once. So that's sort of the risk that I run. So Paulsicle suggests Berserk. I think I had Berserk in here originally, and I ended up cutting it. It didn't feel like it did enough of what I wanted. So Chris is recommending Nylea to give your Stompy Boys trample. It's definitely an interesting thought, but I think a lot of my other huge creatures already have trample. I mean, it gives Gothoma trample, obviously. I don't think that's a wrong choice, but with 41 lands, I'm actually pretty tight on a lot of these cards. But anyway, something to think about too. All right, so one of the things with Gothama is that, of course, you're you prefer to have Gothama die to your own creatures attacking, but of course sometimes your opponents want to attack and kill Gothama too. So I've got a couple of ways to help keep Gothama alive. I've got Nim Deathmantle, I've got Broken Fall, I've got Asceticism, and I've got Cauldron of Souls. And Broken Fall is kind of my favorite of this group because it comes down pretty early and it's kind of an innocuous enchantment. And in fact, if somebody tries to kill it and you have a creature out, or I think actually you can target any creature. Yeah, if there's a creature out and someone tries to kill it, you can just bounce it back to your hand and put a regeneration shield on some random creature, so it's hard for players to get rid of it. But it basically lets Gothama regenerate from any sort of removal that's not exile based. Of course, I like Cauldron of Souls too, because if I have some creatures that I want to fight Gothama and they're all going to die, and Gothama's going to die, I can just give them all persist and then they come back. I still get to draw the cards. Asceticism is nice because it gives Gothama regeneration and makes him hexproof, but I find that most of the time people get rid of Asceticism when they can. Also, I have a land. I have Yavimaya Hollow, which also helps with regenerating Gothama from dying to the fight trigger. So anyway, those are ways to help keep Gothama around. And alright, so what do I got over here? I think those are just some utility cards. So next on the list, I'll go over some additional card draw and card selection that I like in my Gothama deck. Skull Clamp, OG Sylvan Library, Evolutionary Leap. I've got Magus of the Library, Life Crafter's Bestiary, Guardian Project, of course Greater Good, which is absurd with Gothama, and then there's Oran Frostfang, which gives your attacking creatures Death Touch. If I was following Chris's suggestion about Nylea and all my creatures had Trample and Death Touch, it would probably be pretty sick, so maybe I should include Nylea in here. One thing that's really nice about Evolutionary Leap is, say you've got a creature that is sizable but maybe not big enough to kill Gothama, and you're desperate for some cards to draw. You can fight Gothama with the creature dies, and then you can sack Gothama to Evolutionary Leap, and that way Gothama leaves the battlefield and you get to still draw some cards since there was damage dealt to it. It doesn't have to be lethal damage in order to get the card draw with Gothama. It's just any damage he takes in the turn. If he leaves the battlefield, then people get to draw cards based on that damage dealt. So everything else is probably pretty self-explanatory. Magus of the Library does some pretty good work in here. A lot of times it can come down early and give you a little bit of mana acceleration, and then later on, when you're drawing a lot of cards and you have 7 cards in hand, it can draw you an extra card too. So anyway, moving on. Alright, so now I have some utility cards. I've got Arena, because arranging fights with GROTHAMA usually will kill some people. Alright, so Chris has suggested Conjurer's Closet or Teamer Sabertooth. I have actually tried Teamer Sabertooth, and this deck is pretty mana hungry, so I just found that a lot of times I just didn't have the mana available sometimes to really make use of it, so I ended up getting it cut. Yeah, there was other cards at 4 mana that I liked better than Teamer Sabertooth. Conjurer's Closet, I think, might be a little... maybe a little... I don't know. That might seem a little cute, I guess. Okay, so anyway, I've also got Tormod's Crypt, and I've got Elvish Reclaimer, so I can go search up some special lands. And I've got Heroic Intervention, which is just ridiculous. Every green deck should have it. I've also got Ulvenwald Tracker, which is another way to arrange some fights. And I've got Scavenging Ooze for some additional graveyard control. I've got Wall of Roots for some extra mana. It's particularly nice to have that, so you can grab some extra mana on your opponent's turn, maybe to activate something like a Yavimai Hollow. I got a Beast Within. I've got Reclamation Sage. I've got Song of the Dryads. I've got Eternal Witness. I've got Krosan Grip and Force of Vigor. And I've got Yiva, Nature's Herald, which is particularly nice given your big, large green creatures. Flash is pretty sweet. And I've also got Worldbreaker. And one last bit of spicy tech is Kozilek the Great Destroyer. Now, I actually haven't been able to play it yet, but I have great hopes for this. I figure later in the game, if you draw a bunch of cards and you've got a lot of land, you can play Kozilek and you've got a full grip. And at that point, you're kind of in the catbird seat, right? People are going to be concerned that you'll be able to counterspell any sort of way that they're going to try to stop your shenanigans. So anyway, I have great hopes for that. I haven't actually played it yet, so fingers crossed it'll be pretty sweet. All right. Alright, so as you can see by my post-it note, I've got 23 basic forests, and then I've got some non-basic lands that tap for green. So I've got Okina, Temple of the Grandfathers, I've got Treetop Village, Castle Garenbreg, I've got Oran Reef, the Vastwood, which is pretty nice with the Cauldron of Souls, and Desert of the Indomitable for a little cycling. Alright, Chris mentioned he didn't realize GROTHAMA's trigger was when it leaves until he watched the Command Zone video, and he always operated under the assumption that GROTHAMA had to die. GROTHAMA is a really weird card, and a lot of times it takes people quite a few times of reading it and playing against it to get a hang of it. So it's one of the reasons I really like it. I think it's just a weird, super weird-ass card. So anyway, so those are my green mana producers. So that ups the total. I think. Wait a minute. I think I had also a Mosswort Bridge. Yeah. So it's 29 sources of green mana. And for non-basics, I already talked about Yavimaya Hollow. That's quite useful. Mirren the Moaning Well. You can always sacrifice GROTHAMA or one of the huge monsters to gain a bunch of life if you need it. I'm a big fan of Arch of Vraska. It's pretty easy with this deck to get to 10 permanents. And that's a nice mana sink. And Endless Sands is a cool card. This is another way to remove GROTHAMA from the battlefield if you've given it some damage but not enough to kill it. You can have a smaller creature fight GROTHAMA and then remove GROTHAMA with Endless Sands, but instead of exiling it, you can just put it into your command zone, and that way you don't have to sacrifice Endless Sands. So that's kind of a cool line of play too. It's also a way to protect GROTHAMA from your opponents trying to fight it too. Speaking of cool deserts, I've got Scavenging Grounds. I've also got Dust Bowl as well as Field of Ruin to help with some opposing lands. I've got Mirror Pool in the deck, which is secretly another way to kill your own GROTHAMA after it's taken some damage from your creatures. But the nice thing is that you end up with another copy of GROTHAMA. So we've got Blast Zone to help kill. It's mostly in there to help kill like small weenies in case it starts to get a little overwhelming. And I've also got Drownyard Temple, which is nice to feed to Dust Bowl, and then you can get it back. Or if you've drawn too many cards and you got to discard, you can discard the Temple and get it back from the graveyard. This is probably a good consideration for swapping out for Reliquary Tower if I think about it. Alright, so Chris asks, do you find yourself frequently activating Arch? Obviously having draw a card on the land is powerful, but the 5 mana activation is steep. Honestly, I can say that I haven't used Arch of Vraska all that much. But I worry sometimes about playing a mono green deck and not having enough cards, but and in other decks the 5 mana activation would be steep, but this deck plays a lot of lands and can play a lot of lands out of your hand, so I could see cutting it. I mean, there's a lot of card draw in this deck, not to mention GROTHAMA itself, so I could see that being cut. It's a good point. Alright, and also have Winding Canyons, and then I also played my lone copy of Ancient Tomb. I put it in this deck too because sometimes you can just power out GROTHAMA a couple turns early, and it's usually a bit of a nightmare for your opponents. And that's about it. Deck is a lot of fun to play, and it's weird, and sometimes it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, or maybe I get overpowered with decks that are playing a lot of good stuff and powerful things, but at the end of the day, it's just a fun card to pull out, and occasionally it does some explosive, crazy stuff. So if you have any questions, please let me know in the chat. Alright, so Chris mentions this seems like a great deck for Momentous Fall, since you could double up on draw when using it on GROTHAMA that's taken some damage. I've found that it's pretty easy to kill GROTHAMA when I want it to. Kind of greater good serves sort of the purpose of Momentous Fall, and it's an enchantment that kind of sits out there. SJS Mac mentions there's no goad options in green. I don't think there are. There is that artifact, the piece of equipment. I think I considered that card for here, but I kind of feel like GROTHAMA gives people some incentive to attack, right? Because sometimes they're going to want to try to fight GROTHAMA. Yeah, Bloodthirsty Blade. So anyway, if there's any other cards you would like to talk about. Alright, Saint Hokey mentions there's no other goad other than Bloodthirsty. Alright, someone mentioned Grappling Hook. So let's see, Grappling Hook. Let me pull that up. I should have probably added a way to display cards in this particular stream. Anyway, so Grappling Hook says equipped creature has double strike, and whenever equipped creature attacks, you may have target creature block at this turn if able. Okay, so that's kind of like Provoke. I mean, given GROTHAMA double strike is pretty scary. That equip cost though, 4, is tough. Yeah, I don't know. I could see it. Obviously, if you gave GROTHAMA trample and double strike, that would be pretty sick. I'm gonna take a quick bourbon and ginger ale sip. How many total creatures am I running? I don't have a total handy, but I guess I could count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29 creatures. So Saint Hokey points out that there's 30 creatures listed in my Architect deck listing. That deck list is a little out of date. I think it was accurate as of Magic or Command Fest DC in December, but I've made a few tweaks to it since then. SJS Max says, how often do opponents just willingly send their creatures at GROTHAMA? It's a very funny game to watch people try to figure out whether they want to send several creatures to die to GROTHAMA. That's part of why I love it so much, because a lot of times they value the mana and the creatures, the mana they've spent and the creatures on the board. So It's not as much as you would think, but I have had people do it occasionally, and there have been times where I didn't have any way of protecting Grothama, so they drew a bunch of cards. But the way I feel about that is, I mean, that's what Grothama is all about, right? Is big plays. So most of the time it's on my side of the board, but if it's on my opponent's side of the board sometimes, that's cool too. Chris points out that Thromac loves to eat Grothama. I believe that Chris has stolen Grothama and thrown it at me or something along those lines. SJS Max says 3 or 4 for 1 is okay. So yeah, if someone wants to throw away 3 creatures or 4 creatures to kill Grothama and draw a bunch of cards, I'm okay with that. By the way, I want to give a shout out to Ken Meyer Jr. for the Force of Will Shatner playmat. It's pretty sweet. Bill Shatner's pretty hilarious. So Chris points out that he threw Thromac at you when you were trying to do Moss Bridge troll shenanigans. Yep, sounds about right. I feel like Thromac has been thrown at me a few times. Vince wants to know why he can't play Kitchen Finks in this deck. Alright, I'm going to take a bold stand here. I agree that hybrid mana cards should only be in commander decks that have the correct color identity. I know it's a hot controversial topic, but that's how I feel. I'm an old man standing on my deck, on my porch telling you to get off my lawn. Alright, Saint Hoki says, run Spearbreaker Behemoth to protect when needed. I think I had Spearbreaker Behemoth in one of the original versions of this deck, and it does work pretty nicely, but I think I was trying to pull my mana curve down a bit, and I think I ended up cutting it. But yeah, I kind of like Spearbreaker Behemoth. So I just want to do a shout out to anybody who's watching this video on playback. It's going to be on my Twitch channel for on-demand viewing. So if you have any questions, you can hit me up through there. And also, I'm going to have I'm going to upload this to my YouTube channel. And obviously, if you have any comments you want to put in the comments below, I'll be happy to answer your questions there. And also, if you're on Twitter, please look me up and follow me at Blair Witch Green, BLAIR Witch Green, all one word. And I'm always looking for good Commander conversation over there on Twitter. Chris points out Spearbreaker is an oldie but a goodie. You just don't see it too often these days. Yeah, I have to agree. Yeah, I like old Spearbreaker. SJS Max says, such a unique commander. Thanks for going over your deck. Thank you for coming here and asking some questions and checking it out. I really appreciate it. This is definitely one of my favorite decks to play, and I really love talking about it. So hopefully I can give some ideas to people that want to play it as well. And I appreciate you guys coming by. So hopefully, if if I get a good number of views here, I might do this for some of my other decks. So take it easy, people, and keep on commandering.